Hello history buffs, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're journeying back in time, not to the gleaming marble temples or the halls of power, but to the dusty, blood-soaked arenas of ancient Rome. We often imagine Roman entertainment as grand chariot races and theatrical plays. But there was a much darker side, a side where death wasn't just a consequence of war, but the main event, a spectacle for the masses. This is the story of how bloodshed became Rome's favorite pastime. Our story begins not in the Colosseum, but in a much older tradition, funeral rites. Originally, gladiatorial combat was a solemn, religious ceremony known as a munus. It was a duty paid to the spirits of the dead. The first recorded instance was in 264 BC, where the sons of a deceased nobleman staged a fight between three pairs of slaves at their father's funeral. The belief was that the spilled blood would appease the gods and honor the departed soul. It was a somber affair, a far cry from the roaring crowds we associate with gladiators. But Rome was a society in constant flux. As the Republic expanded, so did the wealth and ambition of its elite. What started as a private religious rite soon became a public spectacle. Politicians and powerful figures realized that hosting these games was a surefire way to win public favor. They began to compete, each trying to outdo the other with more fighters, more exotic combatants, and more elaborate displays. The munus was morphing from a duty to the dead into a gift for the living, a very bloody gift. By the late Republic, the games were no longer just for funerals. They were held to celebrate military victories, dedicate new buildings, or simply to entertain the populace during festivals. The scale was staggering. Julius Caesar, for instance, once staged a mock naval battle on an artificial lake, involving thousands of combatants. The religious pretext had all but vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated entertainment. The Roman people developed an insatiable appetite for these spectacles, and the state was more than happy to provide. This led to the construction of permanent stone amphitheaters across the empire, the most famous of which is, of course, the Flavian Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum. Inaugurated in 80 AD, this architectural marvel could hold over 50,000 spectators. Its opening games, hosted by the Emperor Titus, lasted for 100 days. Historical accounts tell us that thousands of wild animals were slaughtered, and countless gladiators met their end on the arena floor during this single festival. The Colosseum became the ultimate symbol of Rome's power and its obsession with death as a game. So, who were the people fighting and dying for the crowd's amusement? The gladiators? The word gladiator comes from gladius, the Latin word for sword. Many were prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or slaves sold specifically for this purpose. They were considered the lowest of the low in Roman society, social outcasts with no rights. Yet paradoxically, they could also become superstars. A successful gladiator, one who survived and won many fights, could achieve fame, fortune, and even freedom. Names like Spartacus, Crixus, and Flamma were whispered in the streets. Graffiti on Roman walls celebrated their victories, and they became unlikely heroes to the common people. Training was brutal. Gladiators lived and trained in schools called ludi. These were part prison, part military barracks. Their lives were controlled by a lanista, the school's owner, who invested in them like prized racehorses. They were fed a specific diet, high in carbohydrates, to build up a layer of fat that would protect them from superficial cuts, making the fights last longer and appear more dramatic. They were trained by experts in specialized combat styles, each with unique armor and weaponry. There was the retiarius with his net and trident, the heavily armored secutor, and the threx with his curved dagger. Each matchup was carefully calculated for maximum entertainment value. A day at the games was an all-day affair. The morning often began with venations, or wild beast hunts. Exotic animals from all corners of the empire lions. Tigers, elephants, rhinos, crocodiles were pitted against each other or against armed hunters called bestiarii. This was a display of Rome's vast reach, a way of showing the public that the empire had tamed the wild, untamable corners of the world. It was a visceral demonstration of power, but it came at a devastating environmental cost, wiping out entire species from their native habitats. Then came the midday executions, the damnatio ad bestias. This was the grimmest part of the show. Condemned criminals, deserters, and followers of outlawed religions were executed in the most horrific ways imaginable. They might be thrown to hungry lions, crucified, or forced to reenact gruesome myths where the hero dies a horrible death. Unlike the gladiatorial combats, there was no chance of survival here. This was raw, state-sanctioned killing, presented as a form of justice and a warning to would-be troublemakers. The crowd would watch, eating their lunch, as human beings were torn apart. The main event, the highlight of the day, was the gladiatorial combat, the Munera. Pairs of gladiators would march into the arena. Salute the emperor with the legendary phrase, "Hail, Emperor! We who are about to die salute you," and the fighting would begin. The combat was governed by rules and overseen by referees. It wasn't always a fight to the death. Gladiator could surrender by raising a finger. The final decision of life or death often rested with the sponsor of the games, but they would gauge the mood of the crowd. A brave fighter might be spared, even in defeat, while a cowardly one would be met with turned thumbs and a swift end. So why? Why did an advanced civilization like Rome embrace such barbarity? There are many theories. For the state, it was a powerful tool of social control. The games were part of the bread and circuses. Policy providing free food and entertainment to keep the masses content and distracted from political issues or economic hardship. It reinforced the social order, showing the public what happened to enemies of the state, criminals, and conquered peoples. It was a constant public reminder of the power of the emperor and the might of Rome. For the individual Roman, it was a complex psychological experience. It desensitized them to violence and death, things that were common in a world of constant warfare and high mortality rates. It was a form of catharsis, a release of primal emotions in a controlled environment. Seeing life and death played out on the sand, watching fighters face their fate with courage or cowardice, allowed spectators to confront their own mortality from a safe distance. It was the ultimate reality show where the stakes couldn't be higher, but not everyone in Rome was a fan. Some philosophers and intellectuals, like Seneca, condemned the games as barbaric and dehumanizing. He described the midday executions as plain butchery and lamented the crowd's bloodlust. However, these were minority voices. For centuries, the games remained wildly popular across the entire Roman Empire, from Britain to Syria. They were an integral part of Roman identity. The decline of the gladiatorial games was a slow process. The rise of Christianity played a major role. Christian teachings, which valued human life and condemned killing for sport, stood in stark opposition to the ethics of the arena. As the empire became increasingly Christianized, emperors began to pass laws restricting and eventually banning the games. The last known gladiatorial combat in the city of Rome took place in the early 5th century AD. The era of death as a game had finally come to an end. Today, the Colosseum stands as a majestic ruin, a tourist hotspot. But as we walk through its ancient arches, it's crucial to remember its true purpose. It wasn't just a stadium. It was a stage for state-sponsored violence on an industrial scale. The story of Roman entertainment is a chilling reminder of how isolated a society can normalize brutality. Turning human suffering into a spectacle, it teaches us about the dark potential that lies within civilization and the importance of empathy and compassion. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Roman world. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history. Let us know in the comments what historical topic you'd like us to explore next. See you in the next video.